Welcome to Business Over Beer, where entrepreneurs, small business owners, and people passionate about what they do bring us their stories and their favorite beer. Hosted by Ben Surratt, Jonathan Kaler, and Jason Knope, it's time to get down to business and drink some beer.
Five, four, three, two. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the second biggest podcast in the Pacific Northwest. This is Business Over Beer, and this is a special Business Over Beer. I am your co-host, Ben Surratt. Alongside me is Jonathan Kaler. Hello, Jonathan. How are you?
Well, hello, Ben. Thank you for that introduction.
On my screen, you're next to me.
Well, that's right. Yes, we are next to each other, still virtually, unfortunately, but
Yes.
you know, that's just kind of the way it goes. I'm excited about this very special episode. We've got a panel of guests. We're going to talk about a very important issue that we're facing as a community, as a country, as a world, and excited to get into that.
Sure.
Also with us, of course, is our good friend, Jason Knope. Jason, welcome to the program. How you doing tonight, my man?
Hey guys, I'm pretty good. Happy to be here tonight, and just wanted to say I really appreciate everyone taking the time from their schedules to join us here today for some much-needed discussions. And what I wanted to do is, excuse me. So basically, we have some pretty awesome guests today. 6 of them to be exact. We want to do some quick introductions with each of them and just kind of briefly go through, tell us about yourselves, a little bit about your backgrounds, the businesses, and how about we start with Greg Walls. He's a registered representative with Primerica Financial Services.
Hello, it's nice to meet everybody. Born and raised in Palm Springs, California. Moved here about 25, 30 years ago. Been in construction for 25 years. I've worked in industrial, I've worked in commercial, and I've worked in residential. Became a financial representative 5 years ago because I figured there needed to be something done about the educating my community about financial literacy. So I took it upon myself to go ahead and go get licensed. And yeah, I have 5 kids, blended family. I like to call ourselves the modern day Brady Bunch, if anybody knows what that means. Yeah, that's me. Right on.
Thanks, Greg. Next, we have Katie Augsburger of Future Work Design.
Yeah, hi. I am Katie. I am a employee experience strategist and co-founder of Future Work Design. We help organizations rethink their organizational policies, practices, and strategies through an equity lens. And I'm a single mom of an 11-year-old girl.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Thanks, Katie. So next we have Joe Sanders, Director of Sales at Old Town Brewing.
How you guys doing? My name is Joe Sanders. I Director of Sales at Old Town, like you were saying. I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee.
Nashville.
Yeah, Nashville. I've been out in Portland for about 7 years now with me and my wife. I'm pregnant. Due August 27th is the due date. We're excited about that. But I have a unique experience growing up as far as, you know, being with some decently prominent, growing up with decently prominent parents, civil rights movement, growing up and just kind of understanding the world through that lens. So I'm excited to be here.
Congratulations, Joe, by the way.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Next, we have Keith Sconiers of Northwest Advisory Group and the Catalyst course.
Thank you. So Keith Sconiers, been here in Portland, Oregon for 18 years. As Jason mentioned, I run Northwest Advisory Group, which is a payment consulting company here in Portland. So I essentially help entrepreneurs manage accepting credit cards on their website, in person, in software, whatever they need to do, and simplifying that for their business. I was raised in Fresno, California, primarily by my grandmother, and in a home that was built by my grandfather while he was permanently ill. He built a 6-bedroom home for my grandmother in the 80s. And so I'm excited to be here as well and to share a little bit about my experiences and to learn from everyone else as well.
Thanks, Keith. So last but certainly not least,
I know, I'm like, am I last?
Rowe, the serious entrepreneur whose credits include being the founder and chief innovator of iUrban Teens, as well as a soul-trained dancer.
Wait a minute, how'd you know that?
Come
You
on.
told us.
I thought
I
I
did?
recognized her.
Oh my gosh, I don't think I told you guys that.
Where's the footage at?
You must saw the whole episode.
I got footage. I got footage too.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
on demand.
I mean, going down the Soul Train line. I tell you, I think I've lived like 20 lives over the past 60 years. I am Dina Pierrot, and I am the founder of iUrban Teen, which is a STEM plus arts program that I created back in 2011. Because at the time I was a commissioner here in the state of Washington on the Commission on African American Affairs, and all of our ethnic commissioners are looking at the opportunity gap issue, especially for male youth of color. And so being the entrepreneur that I am, I always do, entrepreneurs try to find solutions to things, right? And so I created iUrban Teen to fill that gap. And so since I've launched it, we've served over 8,000 youth, and we're now in 4 states. And Joe, you were talking about Nashville. Nashville is one of the cities that wants us to bring iUrban Teen there. And I was like, Nashville? Isn't that like country western? I'm like, do they even have Black people in Nashville?
Yeah.
I'm like, wow.
It's the biggest misconception about Nashville.
I guess so.
We always joke the best way to spot a tourist is the person wearing a cowboy hat.
See, that'd be me. Look, that would be me, okay?
Yeah.
I'd have an afro, puff, and a cowboy hat. But I'm from California. I actually moved to Portland from Compton, California, okay? And so you talk about a culture shock. I was in for a shock. But yeah, I moved up from Compton back in the early 90s, and I lived in Portland, then Vancouver for a number of years, and I moved up here to Seattle about 4 years ago, but heading back to Vancouver. But I'm also one of the founding members of Black Women in STEM 2.0 with 3 other founders, and that's a growing organization. I also have a group there in Portland that I started about 8 years ago called the Portland Metro Diversity Employment Network. And it's about 180 or so HR managers and corporate recruiters, where I formed it because I really wanted them to really understand equitable hiring practices, right? And how do you do this recruiting? If I got to show you guys how to do this for free, that's what we're going to do, because I take this work so seriously. And so we've been meeting once a month for 8 years. And so I'm really proud of that group, and they really do some good work. So that's about it. I have 2 sons. And I will say one of the hardest roles, I always say one of the hardest roles there is in life to be the mother of African-American sons, right? Especially now, when every time this happens, it like hits your heart. But so I have 2 sons, one's 35, one's 26, and 3 little granddaughters.
Thank you, everybody.
That's awesome. Yeah, so good to meet all of you. We're really thankful that you all took the time to do this and to be with us today. The mission of the Business Over Beer podcast is, to provide a platform for small business owners, entrepreneurs, other passionate professionals to participate in real conversations, and to build a community to help small businesses succeed. I mean, we believe that small business is the backbone of this nation's economy. And, with the convergence of the COVID-19 pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, the issue of systemic racism has really been thrust to the forefront, and a reaction not like I've ever seen in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. And so we felt really compelled at Business Over Beer to not speak, but to act. And this was just a first step in trying to bring the conversation around racism, especially as it relates to small business, to the forefront. And today we're gonna try to talk about three specific areas. We want to kind of talk about what is the problem. We're not going to solve the problem here tonight. It's obviously very complex and multi-layered, although we've got a lot of really smart people here, so we may give it a try, but we probably won't solve it tonight. But let's try to define the problem, and bring further awareness, to racism in our communities. Two, we want to talk about how do we talk about the problem? How do we engage more in this dialogue? How can we have, public, productive, and open conversations about race and about racism in our workplaces, in our families, in our communities? And third, what actions can we start to take? Again, we're not going to solve this problem, but we can, we're all entrepreneurs here, so we all have a bias for action. So what are the actions we can start to take to start to address the problem in the community? So with that, let's begin with Dina. Dina, we've heard, for a long time, but especially over the last few weeks, that it's quote unquote systemic racism in this country that's holding back the progress of people of color. Can you break down systemic racism for us a little more specifically? What does systemic racism really mean?
Systemic racism are systems that were created not by us. These are systems that have been in place for decades, right? So when people say the system is broken, the system's not broken. The system was created to do exactly what it's doing, by marginalizing out certain people. The system was made for more of a homogeneous type of environment for white men. That's what it was built for. And so even when you look at systems of recruiting, we'll use systems of recruiting and what those systems were, right? A lot of those systems are zeroing out others from even applying or even getting in the door. And so when we talk about these systems and they need to be shifted, and some people say systems were created by people and people can change those systems. And just like Katie was saying, when she does work with looking at things with an equity lens, it's looking at all of your systems that you currently have in place with an equity lens and learning who's missing from the table. Who are we missing from this equation of where we're trying to get to the outcome? Someone's missing. There's pieces missing here. So I don't know, Katie, you may want to add something to that around the systemic racism.
Yeah, I feel like you've nailed it. The only thing I would add is that the system that we're in is a system we've all inherited, right? Like this is nobody on this call chose the system, and I'm assuming everyone on this call wants to dismantle an oppressive system. But the way our country has been designed was on the backs of Black and brown folk. And that we are really inherited a system in which our schools, our hospitals, our police force, our food is all dependent and really centered around the amplification of white voices at the oppression of Black voices. And that what we have to really do is think about how to dismantle those systems and rebuild that we are actually at a point in our country's life cycle that small reform is not going to change. These systems are so deeply rooted in the oppression of others that we actually have to rebuild them and rethink them in order for us to actually make movement, the important movement to not cause further harm and to actually do repair and really rethink of how we show up for each other.
And we talk about too around these systems, and because everything is centered around whiteness, right? When it's not centered around whiteness, it makes people nervous. They don't know how to take it. Like, again, you heard me say I moved up here from Compton. So I centered everything around my culture, around Blackness, and that wasn't perceived too well here in the Pacific Northwest, even by people that look like me, because because I always, you know, us entrepreneurs, we always got to shake up the system. You know, we got to change things around. And so what's the story about the three bears? Look, I'm getting old now. I can't remember these fairy tales.
Goldilocks?
Was it Goldilocks and the three bears?
Goldilocks?
She broke into their house, right?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
you see, in that story, in that fable, the bears were the bad guys. Goldilocks, this little blonde haired girl, was the damsel in distress, right? So it was centered around her. She just broke in somebody's house. She
I
ate their food.
never even thought of it like that, Dina.
Yeah, so look, I'm breaking it down by a fable, okay? But when you think about it, she broke in. Now, if that was one of them brown bears breaking into Goldie's house, they would have shot him, okay? So just kind of show you how these systems, even fables, were created around people. They weren't created around people that look like me, you know? So when we think about these systems, I always tell people that whites create space for themselves, right? They create space where they work within and they build upon. All others, have to try to fit into that space all the time. We have to always try to fit in. And so a lot of times, a lot of us will code switch or shift. I call it shape shift. We will try to code switch and be someone that we're not to fit into your world. It shouldn't be that way, you know? And when they do show up, and they show up because I'm very opinionated and very, as you can tell, sometimes when they show up like me, it's scary for some people, and they'll try to shut you away, push you away, you know? Until that changes, we will always have those systems of oppression.
Hey, Joe, what do you think it is about this issue that white people have such a hard time understanding the importance of it or the deepness of it? What is it about this issue that seems to be so hard for white people to truly grasp the seriousness of this?
Well, it's multi-layered, right? So, you know, the term, you know, cognitive dissonance comes to mind, which is basically when you have two conflicting ideas or a conflicting idea that is met with a reality or a set of facts that is too hard to accept. And so then the mind tries to come up with all sorts of ways to make it seem like this is okay, right? Like this is normal. And, you know, I didn't just hear what I just heard. But deep down, you know that what you just heard and what you just saw was wrong or making sense. And it goes directly against what your beliefs are. And that is a hard place for anyone, but particularly white people when it comes to race and the inequalities of race and the history of slavery and racism and systemic racism in this country and white privilege. These are things that people don't want to deal with. They don't want to cope with when the evidence is as clear as day in everyday life and everything that we do. The evidence is right in front of you all the time in major ways and in small ways. And it's a part of the mind that, you know, it's a battle. It's an internal battle inside the mind and inside the soul that doesn't want to allow you to let go of your white privilege and or your thoughts of white supremacy, right? Once those or your religion, or you can go down the line, right? These ideas, once they're presented to you, all you want to do is say, okay, I just heard something that was completely factual. I just saw it with my own eyes, but I'm gonna try to find out a way to rationalize this in my head, where that, you know, that's not what it was. And so it creates a systemic problem that trickles down through all facets of society, where you have a country of, you know, white people that are in denial, right? And even the ones who aren't in denial end up being, sometimes afraid to speak up or speak out, to the ones who aren't in denial, right? And so everyone just kind of, it's the elephant in the room. Everyone just kind of rides along every day and lets the news cycle pass by, and day by day and year by year, as we watch people, Black people get shot in the street and brutalized, or just discriminated against or treated badly, or a white friend makes a racist joke, right, and you just let it slide, right? It's these little things that happen every day that you just kind of let pass, and over time it builds up to a moment like we have now, where it's all coming to a head, and everyone is in the streets all over the world, acknowledging this thing that we all know, and we've all known for years. We've all known our whole lives, since the moment you realized your skin was Black, or your skin was white, or your skin was, whatever. It's the elephant in the room that no one seems to have been allowed to talk about in the white community outwardly. So I think now it's all coming to a head. It was like, of course we knew this. Of course we knew this was there. We knew it was wrong. We just didn't have to deal with it, so we didn't deal with it. And that also is a part of white privilege, right? Is not having to deal with the hard truths of the world, and just letting time just slide by, and saying the right things, but never doing the right things as a whole. And it's us denying, it's us never having addressed the original sin of slavery that this country was founded on, and the fact that this country was built off the backs of slaves, and then quote unquote freed, but then terrorized from that moment on, and treated as less than human, less than not American. And time passes on, and here comes Barack Obama, and then it's another piece of the cognitive dissonance for white people to say, oh, there's no racism in America anymore, we elected a Black president. It's like any little thing that someone can latch on to reinforce their ideals that they don't want, to not face the truth down, is a part of what has happened year after year, decade after decade, to the point where it's all coming to a head right now. And I mean, this is where we are. I mean, we're all just addressing the elephant in the room that we all knew was going to bubble up at some point, to the point where everyone was going to say, okay, enough is enough. We got to figure this out.
And that's the thing, though, Joe, is that, and that's how privilege works, is they don't have to worry about it. Yeah. In their mind, they don't have to worry about it. It's a thing that happens over there. And, I never like to group everyone into one group, because there's some really strong advocates. I don't like using the word ally, because that's still coming from a place of power, but there's some great advocates out there that really support this work and have fought the good fight all the way back from civil rights era. So there are some good, and I still think that the good outweighs the bad.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's always been, our white brothers and sisters who have stood alongside us in this fight. And that is what's so beautiful about the moment now, is that, there's more white people in the streets than there's ever been for Black issues. And that's really what it takes. I mean, none of us win when the cloud of racism hangs over us and we never address it, right? We never fix the problem. And, there are tons of allies, right? I have, countless beautiful, amazing white friends who always want the right things and always have my back and Black people's back. But it's really the power. It's the power that be. It's the power structure. I feel like it's at times when, how sometimes, some white people, even good intentioned white people, don't recognize their white privilege, right? Yeah. Because the power structure that built this place designed it for you. And so that's the whole point. You don't have to think about your presence in the world, what your color means in the world. You don't think about how to navigate through this space, because this space was designed for you, right? So it's hard to get people to wake up to say, oh, wait a minute, like this is white privilege, and it obviously is happening more and more, but it's a part of it, right? trying to figure out how even our allies and even our brothers and sisters, our white brothers and sisters can say, hey, like, I have to fight for this as much as I fight for anything else, because this is my issue too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not just Black people's issue. This is our issue.
Yeah. Can I add something to that? Like,
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think that often we've framed the conversation for white folks around anti-racist work as a benevolent exercise that they do for Black and brown folks. Like their efforts are a kindness that they are doing for Black and brown
we're
folks.
doing you the favor
Exactly.
to be anti-racist.
Yeah. But really, like, I think what's important about this moment right now is that white people are starting to recognize that they too are harmed by this system. That they cannot be in an authentic relationship with Black folk if racism exists.
Amen.
Like our relationships,
Amen.
our relationships will never be aligned. We will never be in authentic space together if racism exists. And so really to like move away from this benevolent gift for Black and brown folks to like, racism is hurting us all, and we must all work together to dismantle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to take time, but you know what? I really do feel that we're going to see a shift this time. Now, I've been through the Rottweilers, I've been through Rodney King, all these things, right? And everyone gets on the bandwagon for about 3 or 4 months, and then it goes away, right? The momentum goes away. And it goes right back to normal again, or their type of normal. But I have a feeling this time that we're going to see some changes, because the world saw this man basically get lynched, and die right in front of their eyes. So I think that affected a whole lot of different communities, in a way that they've never felt it before. But the thing is, how do we be strategic on what's the next action steps, and how do we make it sustainable, from this point on? So, but I definitely do think there's going to be a shift.
Dina, what do you think a win looks like as it relates to that?
So a win?
Yeah, like what does a win actually look like? Because I hear a couple of different things around, like what you were mentioning about being in harmony in our relationships, and not being able to have that if racism exists. But I'm not quite sure if we can actually ever get to a point where racism doesn't exist. But I would like to know, what does an actual win look like as it relates to either race relations or the wealth gap or access to opportunity, or, right? Because at a certain level, certain aspects of it are very structural, and then there's certain aspects of it that are personal, that one that will never ever be able to be reached, right? So like, what do you think a win looks like as it relates to this specific situation?
For this, and you know what, I'll take small wins.
The
small wins, and I think that there's going to have to be baby steps in this, because they can't rush this, really can't rush this and get it right. So the small wins for me are, like last Friday, we had a webinar for the teens in our program.
Yeah.
Mixed group of teens, right?
Yeah.
Because even though we have an intentional reach to male youth of color, we have girls in our program, we have youth with disabilities, we have low opportunity white youth in our program. So they're all learning together. So even on this conversation on race and healing, they were all in that room. So for me, working with these teens, because they're the next generation that's going to be really changing this. So working with them and making sure they're doing. The other thing too is making sure I'm talking to white parents on how do you work with your children on this topic of race. How do we want to make sure that you're not raising an Amy Cooper, out there? And you guys know who Amy is. All right, we call her Karen. You're not raising her, or you're not raising that police officer that killed George Floyd. And a lot of what I'm really happy about is that I have been getting a lot of emails and phone calls and LinkedIn messages from these parents that want to make sure they're having this conversation with their children. How young is too young? They're never too young. You start now, right? Because even at age 3, they are already starting to model your behavior, you know, on race.
Yeah.
You know, I had a really quick story. I spoke up at Western Washington University up in Bellingham last year, and they wanted me to talk around diversity and equity. And so when I was there, I thought it was just going to be instructors and community members, but 90% of the audience were students from Western. 75% of that 90% were young white male students. Now, they weren't getting any college credits or anything for being there. And so when I started talking, and I always get sidetracked, as you can tell, I said, you know what, you guys, I got to say something. I just noticed something here in the room. There's a lot of you white guys here. I said, you're not getting any credit to be here to listen to me. And so I sat down, went and sat down next to one. And I said, so tell me, why are you here? And he said, I'm here because I want to be a part of the solution, not part of the problem, right? And the other young white students were shaking their head, yeah. And so I changed my whole conversation and focused on them and let them talk. And so another one said, you know, when I was growing up, I kept hearing these things from my parents and other family members, but in my heart, it didn't feel right. So I started just researching things on my own. So I don't want to be in that world, you know. Mm-hmm. So my heart felt so warm to know that they were there and they wanted to make a change. So that's why I keep saying this next generation is really going to be some real game changers. Mm-hmm. I believe they are.
Yeah.
I was going to ask this question. I'm sorry. I was going to ask this question later, but this is the right time to do it. I'm biracial. My dad is black. My mom is white.
Get out of here.
Yeah, for real. I know. Everybody says that. So, but growing up, it always seemed like I had to choose a side. And what I mean by that, when something like this happens, mm-hmm. It's like, I got to pick a team. And I don't want to pick a team. I don't want to pick a team. My team is the team that is for the right thing.
Yeah.
And doing the right thing. That's my team. Mm-hmm. What can we say to our kids who, I wish Greg were here because he has biracial kids as well. But how do we teach our children of biracial children to feel comfortable about talking about race, but not having to feel they have to be picking a team or choosing a side?
And they don't. And that's the first thing, is to make sure that they know and they feel that they don't have to pick a side. You know, they can self-identify to whomever they want to be. If I want to say I'm Barney the purple dinosaur, then I'm Barney the purple dinosaur. Damn it. Okay, I'm not changing my story. And so that's the thing, is you allow them to be who they are. Make sure that they know about their whole history, their whole cultures of both sides, those rich cultures. But you give them the confidence to be who they are. The world is going to make that choice for them, though, right? Mm-hmm. If they have any kind of inkling of looking black, the world is going to see them as black. Mm-hmm. Now, for me, you can see how light-skinned I am, but both of my parents are black. I'm not biracial. I'm more multiracial, but I self-identify as a black female, you know. But I still embrace all these other cultures that's running through my veins. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable. I want to go to Ireland. I want to go knock on some relatives' doors and go, hey, guess who? Okay.
And I want to be there to film that.
You know what? No, I did my DNA stuff, right? So I got all this Irish stuff. And I do know my grandfather's parents migrated from Ireland, but there's some Sweden in there too. Okay. So I said, okay. So I'm claiming that as Viking, okay? Because that's why I sound so badass, okay? Because I got Viking blood. So I said I can go down the Soul Train line, doing the river dance, and wearing a Viking hat, okay? I'm going to represent all of them, you know. But no,
I will say, Ben, we share an identity. I have a black father and a white mother, but how I show up in the world, how I look to people as Black. That's how I identify. But I and my daughter is also biracial. And it is important to me to communicate to her that, yes, there are two sides of this, but there's the side of the oppressed and the oppressor. There's not, that is the distinction. And I've actually found that in Black space, I am Black, and in white space, I am Black. So it is not to me, it's never been a hard choice to make. I've never felt that I had to choose a side, but if I have to choose a side, it is, I side with people who are experiencing oppression. I don't side with people who are oppressed. And I do think there is, like, when 45 said there are good people on both sides, that's not accurate, right? Like, there are good white people, that is absolutely accurate. But anyone that is in support of oppression is not on the right side of history. And so I think it's important to claim who you are and claim your identity and claim your Blackness, and to be proud and excited about the contributions that you make as a person in the Black community, but also recognize that, like, we have privilege as light-skinned Black folk, and that like my role, my daughter's role, your role, Dina's role as light-skinned Black folk is to then amplify the voices of dark-skinned Black folk, because we have different privilege. Colorism exists in our world, and it is important that we are always on the side of the most oppressed people, and that we work hard to advance that cause.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I mean, like, Dina, you was surprised to find out I was half Black. I don't have those features.
No.
That is a privilege, except I look Middle Eastern. And so this is not to be funny, but after 9/11, I had more racist comments thrown at me.
Yeah.
I mean, and it was just a real thing. And it was surprising. But at the same time, it was like, but wait, I'm not that. Where am I? Where do I fit in? Like, and this was, and I was 20 something. I was in my 20s. And I still didn't know where I fit in. And it's just, and I don't know, if I don't blame my parents. I don't.
Right.
I found the most healing thing was to be in community with other multiracial folks, to be in community in space with other biracial folks, because I think that they're, especially Black folks that have white mothers, there are some very nuanced experiences for those folks, but like how you're taught about racism in an early age, how you experience colorism, how you navigate space as a light-skinned person of color in this country is very different. And like, so it's like, I have found having a community of other, both light-skinned Black people and biracial Black folk has been really helpful in healing. So I would just suggest that to you as a person on the journey.
I get it. I get it. Greg, I'm glad you came back, because you have biracial children, correct?
Yes.
So what's your take on that, on the conversation?
Well, I've always told my kids that be proud of where you came from and respect others. And if anybody ever messes with you, just tell them in a very nice way that, you know what, I have the best of both worlds. And kind of joke about it. And that's kind of how I, growing up in Palm Springs, kind of got through life. I figured if somebody had a problem with me because of the color of my skin, that was their problem. I was going to say hi to them every morning anyway with a smile on my face. And that's been my motto through my whole life. I've been a bricklayer here in Portland. I moved up to Portland 25 years ago, and I don't think I've ever seen another Black person that was a mason for like the first 10 years. And going through the apprenticeship was pretty tough. So, but I had, somebody told me if you work harder than anybody, you always have a job, and that's what I did. And I always had a job. I always worked. I never missed a beat. And so, from my perspective, I guess it's kind of weird for me, because I knew it was there, but I kind of ignored it. Does that make sense? I said, nobody's gonna stop me. I'm going to do my thing because I'm just as good as you. So there's no problem. And I've got a lot of friends that, you know, this is a funny story. I've got a lot of friends that are racist. They just love me to death because I just ignore them. And I tell jokes and I laugh with them, you know, and, but I know that it's that's the way they grew up. That's what they were taught. I can't remember who said it, and that's just the way the United States has just evolved. And I think if we all, especially the people, just, how can I say this? Realize what happened in the beginning, the sins of the United States, and everybody realizes it, let their ego go, then we can start healing. That's just my perspective.
But Greg, I have a question for you. You said that they're all racist. Do they make racist comments to you?
Not in the no, not really. I know, I just I know that they are though. I can remember when I was working in Toledo, Oregon, because I did a lot of industrial construction, and I was working nights, and that was the night that Obama got elected president. And it got pretty bad then, and that's pretty much one of the first times I spoke up, and I was the only black guy there, and it got pretty bad. And I just told him, you know what? Stop with the comments. You know, things are changing for the better. And I never heard anything, you know.
You know, because it's always, and I ask that because it can be scary and ugly and all that when you have to advocate for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're the only one in an all-white environment. But when you don't speak up and advocate for yourself, that's when, and that's why so many in our community have heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, all of those things, because we internalize it and we keep it in instead of, I always say, interrupting it, right? So it's how do you have those conversations when someone has said, you know, a macroaggression or a microaggression? How do you interrupt that? You know, in a way where you can still have your voice heard without fear of repercussions, right?
Well,
So,
and what happens on the other side is that white people are also afraid of advocating because of how their family, their friends, the people around them, then they're in that situation, or I'm in that situation now where I am a person of one. And so I'm likening those two situations, because then what happens is nobody says anything. And now we're not having a dialogue because we're afraid. And go ahead, Joe.
No, I was going to just say, you know, something on that. You know, it was a joke that someone said this past Thanksgiving. It was during impeachment times, and they were talking about how everyone was going to have to go home, and I can't remember where I heard it, but everyone's going to have to go home and have these awkward Thanksgivings, you know. But then the flip side of the joke was like, well, every black household is going to be having a great time, you know what I'm saying? 'Cause we're all on the same page, you know what I'm saying? It's, you know, it's only in the white households where Thanksgiving is going to be awkward, where, you know, the younger generation is clashing with mom and dad or grandpa, grandpa. It's like, you know, and we're just sitting back laughing like, hey, Thanksgiving's going to be fine for us. We're all on the same page. But it's just kind of like what you said, you know. It's
That's
like,
a good point.
You know,
that's a good point, Joe.
You know, it's like, it's a struggle. That's a struggle too, right? But, you know, how many people want to put themselves out there to be ostracized by their own people, or who wants to fight with their family, you know, and who wants to go down that road? And I think if there was a time, this is the time to do it, you know, for all people, for white people, you know, but, you know, it's not as awkward to bring these things up right now for anybody. So, you know.
I think that, like, the thing I often offer to white folks is, if you are not willing to get in the discomfort of having these difficult conversations with your most loved and cherished family members, then how can I trust that you will do that to the large systems, or to protect my life if someone is dangerous?
yeah.
So a lot of white folk like to really want to believe that they are good, kind white people, and I believe that they are. But if you cannot have the conversations, the difficult conversations with your uncle, with your cousin, with your grandmother, who you know that there is safety in that relationship, if you are not able to do that, then it becomes more difficult for Black folks to trust that you will have those conversations, that you'll put yourself and your privilege on the line when our bodies are at risk.
Yep.
And And the
Yeah.
hard truth of it is that if in those moments you are unwilling to challenge, then you are complicit in racism.
Yeah.
For sure.
You're either racist or anti-racist.
Yeah.
It's either
Yeah.
one of the two.
There's not a middle in this.
Yeah,
one.
there's no middle.
Mhm.
You know.
But also, something that a part of my experience, is just having grown up in the South. The South is I would argue, easier place to navigate racism, right? Because it's more outward, it's more out in front, right? I have found living in Colorado, for a long period of time, and then also living in Oregon now for a long period of time, the racism is veiled. The racism is walking all around you, but you don't see it, right?
Yeah.
People aren't wearing Confederate flags on their shirts and hats and T-shirts and belt buckles and
But it's
flying the flag
there.
on their truck, but in the South, people let you know how they feel, and then it can be addressed, right? Or you can know to stay away from someone or not. So it's a more delicate dance, in a place like Oregon and Washington, and Pacific Northwest, and and these other places that are less outward. I'd almost rather have it the other way, so then I can start the conversation. I remember thinking, you said 45. After 45 got elected, I remember that I was so upset, and the way I navigate through life is one where I'm happy all the time. I'm positive. My friends would say I'm the eternal optimist, but my job is where I'm around white people every day, all day, every day, in different settings. And I remember for the first week, just thinking to myself, one out of, just being in the room, being like, one out of every 4 of y'all voted for this fool. You know what I'm saying? Like, one out of every 4 of y'all did this. You know what I'm saying? And y'all all look so normal and happy, but the statistics would say that, half this room voted for this fool. And so it had my guard up, like, who are you? Do I know you? Like, and I don't like to be in that space. And I never really had to be in that space. Although even when it's an awkward scenario or it's not a favorable scenario, as being a black man, around a bunch of white people, I still don't let that kind of idea come into my space, except for that the next day and that week after, where I was walking around looking at everybody sideways, like who are you really? You know what I'm saying? Like where are the wolves in sheep's clothes right now? You know what I'm saying? And I had to let that go, because it was starting to drive me crazy. I was like, I can't do my job, I can't live my life, I can't breathe, I can't walk through life the way I normally do, because I'm looking over my shoulder. I'm paranoid that I'm surrounded by closet racists. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, Keith, I wanted to ask you, I read on your website, you said one of the ways that you've been able to combat unfavorable conditions through your life is through stories. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that means to you, and how have you done that, and what role can stories play in overcoming racism in our community?
That's a great question, and I appreciate you asking, because to be transparent, I really struggle with this conversation, right, around race. And part of that might have just something to do with how I was raised and where I was raised and the experiences and situations that I was in or I wasn't in. Growing up in Fresno, California, mom was a single mom, dad was in and out of the system. Stepdad was a correctional officer that she met several years later. We moved from the, I guess you would call the ghetto, like where everyone looked like me, when I was in the first grade, to the other side of town where nobody looked like me. And I lived there from first grade to fifth grade. And I don't remember having any, maybe I might have had some other friends that were maybe mixed or Mexican, but I didn't have a lot of diversity from first grade to fifth grade, right? And then I went from that community back to the other side of town, living with my dad, who was still in and out of the system. And then going from there and living with my grandmother. Now, the home that my grandmother lived in was, like I said, built by my grandfather, who was a African-American preacher that had a tumor on the base of his brain, that built a 6-bedroom home on half an acre for my grandmother out of scrap wood, right? And so going from there and then into high school and then going into sports, I never My uncle was Portuguese. My godfather was Mexican. There was quinceañeras on both sides growing up. I just had a different experience around race, and it wasn't that I didn't understand that it was there, but it was never a central conversation. Like my dad or my grandmother never had the conversation with me around what it meant to be Black in America, or what to do when the police officers pull you over, or any of those things. And so I didn't grow up with that story or that really wired into my consciousness, right? And so when I got done with college, I really spent the first 12 or 15 years really in survival mode, if you will, of just trying to figure out my own career. And the story that really stuck with me was that my grandfather could build a 6-bedroom home for my grandmother on a half an acre on a $30 a month income from the military, with a tumor in the base of his brain, that there was nothing that was going to stop me. And so to be honest with you, I never placed a great deal of attention on what equity meant or what racism in the workplace looked like, because for the most part, it just wasn't a conversation that I had often. And it wasn't until I ended up in a biracial relationship, actually, that I began to understand how different people respond to these events, like George Floyd getting killed, right? When you're in the Black community and you're sitting there with everyone with you and you see this on TV, everyone's pissed. But when I was in a biracial relationship, married, and see that I'm pissed and they're questioning, why did this happen and why did he run and all these things, I began to understand how different we are nurtured, and how we're trained to think about what's happening, especially through the media, through imaging, through the conversations we have or we don't have. And so when you ask me what are the stories that stick with me, the stories that stick with me really are that when I think about privilege, I haven't gotten to a place where I understand enough about it for me to embrace it, because I don't like to think about someone having an advantage over me. If anything, I think that I am tremendously empowered that somebody thought so much of me that there needed to be a system in place for me to fail. And so that's just the stories that stick in my head. I understand that they're there. I understand that it's real, but I also realize that there's a lot of people that have been in my life from different cultures, different races, different parts of the world, that have been incredibly supportive and empowering. And there's been plenty of people that look like me that have not been empowering. And so those are the stories that I think about. I'm very conscious of what is happening and why it's happening and the systems that need to be addressed. But I also recognize and realize that there's more to this story that people are wrestling with than just the fact of, are they a racist or are they not, right? Whether we want to acknowledge it or not, there's a great deal of this that is very political that I don't appreciate, because when it becomes about left or right and who's on the right side of history, and you are or you aren't, if you're not doing these 2 or 3 things that we've checked the box that you should be doing, and if you're not, you're a racist, then I believe that we are placing people in a position of the cognitive dissonance that Joe is talking about, where it's like, well, I have conservative values, I believe in free enterprise, I believe in working hard for yourself, but this is just a reality. There's another part of the media that says that everything you're talking about today is a complete fabrication by the other side that is trying to control you, so don't react to it. And so by allowing this conversation to be controlled by the media and controlled by politics, I believe we have made it more difficult to actually solve the problem. Because not only are we saying that we want you to accept this, but in the process, you may also be at risk of accepting these other things that you don't agree with, that are in conflict with your values that you were raised with. And so when I think about stories, I just think about all those different stories that are playing out. And I understand how difficult it is for people to grow up in a world where they thought that this is what it stood for, this is how it was built, and this is what it is, to all of a sudden go to the other side of recognizing and realizing that that is a lie, and everything that my closest relationships and contacts, the people I love, lied to me and didn't tell me the truth, to go into the other side and embracing the fact that it needs to change. And so I think about stories around that constantly. And the most important story, I think, for me is that my grandfather left behind a legacy. And for whatever reason, I have chosen to, I won't say to my own detriment, or hopefully not detriment to the cause, but I've chosen to really focus in on the 99% of the things that are in my control, not the 1% of someone else's attitude, and being conscious of the systems that are of what they are and where they are, and hopefully get into a place where we can come together with an effective strategy that is not focused on politics or focused on distractions, if you will, to get where we hope to get.
Get it? Yeah. I mean, we only have our life we only have our life to have any kind of story to give, right?
Yeah.
That's the only story we know. I only know my story right now, but I think when it comes to, like, I know what you're saying, Keith, for sure, but I think also understanding, like, oh, this gets me every time. Get your bootstraps on.
Oh yeah, right.
That bugs me, and because
you can't pull your bootstraps up.
Exactly.
You can't pull your bootstraps up when you don't have boots.
Exactly. And so I get it, Keith.
Yeah,
for sure. And I'm with you, but at the same time, recognizing that there are other people who don't have that. They didn't have that stepdad that moved them to the other side. They're stuck where they are. And they have to, they're surviving every day. So I guess I appreciate everything you're saying, and I agree with you, but I guess just focus maybe on, and this is just coming at, I'm not trying to tell you what to do at all, but I'm just saying, just maybe focus on, like, just kind of empathize with other people. That's all, maybe.
And
I don't know.
What came up for me, Keith, when you were saying that, is often when we talk about moving to the other side, it is moving closer to whiteness. So, like, the other side often is more affluent, more white, and it gives us more access. So that's a similar thing that happened to me when I was younger, is that I went from a very poor, low-income housing neighborhood to a very white, very wealthy high school. And that movement towards whiteness allowed me so much more advantages and avenues to go. But the problem is that those access had a lot to do with the racial group that I was in, because white people held power and money. And so I benefited from that, but the education that I got was only because I was in white space, and how difficult it was for me to recognize. And I think what's great about this conversation is Black people are not a monolith.
Yeah,
we don't have
the exact,
we don't have the exact same opinion about this. We don't have the exact same politics, and I think that's important. But I also feel like it is critical for us to not think about this as a Katie or Keith or Dina or Joe conversation. This is about, like, the systemic racism and system that causes harm, not how we each individually have had very different experiences.
And I would say, what your lens and your walk through life is, think of it as, like, it's a blessing, in some ways, that you don't, that you didn't have to deal with these burdens, as you go through life. I didn't have to deal with a lot of the burdens when I was growing up. My parents were very good at shielding me and wrapping me in the Black community, so I didn't feel it as much. And then when I did end up in more of a white community, through middle school and high school, I was prepared to navigate through that space. But just think how great the world would be if all Black people could navigate through life without having to think about these issues all the time, and having to make these decisions and having to make these choices and pick sides and defend yourself and come up with explaining yourself to some other people, right? That is the end goal, the utopia at the end of the road, where these conversations become laughable because we all understand our past. Our past, we look back and say it was so silly, and look how good we all have it now, as a community, as a world, as human beings, because we don't quibble over these made up social constructs that are built around melanin in skin and the power that can come with one or the other. It's like if we all have equal opportunities and rights, and we can just live our lives, and that's really all Black people want, around the world. We just want to live our lives and build families and take care of our kids and have equal opportunities and rights and not have to carry the weight of the world. So, like you said, everyone's lens is different, and so and everyone's walk through life is different. And how great would it be if most Black people said, like, oh, listen, like I just didn't feel that when I was, growing, like that wasn't a thing, right? That at that point we're all getting somewhere, right?
They're getting somewhere, that's right.
When the majority of people feel that exact same sentiment, like, it's such a small issue because it just doesn't exist anymore. But because it's not, and that's not your fault, and that's okay. I tell white people all the time when I'm explaining white privilege to them, like I tell them, it's not your fault. You didn't write the laws and the legislation, you didn't start slavery, right? But it's about acknowledging that it exists. And once everyone acknowledges it exists, we can have the conversation and we can look at life through that lens, and we can all make things better, right? But if there's no acknowledgement of a thing existing, then we're never going to fix it, and we're always going to have problems, right? And it's just and we all win. We all empower ourselves. I was thinking about people talking about looting and rioting and all this and destruction of property, and it's like rioting after a major incident of pain to the Black community. It is the language of the oppressed, right? And so it's part of, no one wants their businesses burned down or anything like that, right? But at the same time, it's like, well, if you're going to kill us with impunity and you're not going to listen to us for year after year, decade after decade, then guess what? We're going to have to burn something down. We're going to have to shut this all down so you pay attention, right? And if that's what gets the conversation started, then so be it. And it has started the conversation in this particular context. It hasn't always progressed in that way because they try to spin the narrative, like you were saying. But it's like, once the white financial institutions begin to shut down, right? Cities begin to not function. Let's say aside from COVID, if they had to shut down New York City or whatever like that, when business stops, when the money stops flowing, people got to start paying attention, right? So it's a way to say, hey, we got, hey, wake up over here. We trying to tell you something, So, everyone wins when we don't have to go through this. We don't have to live this way. We don't have to have these struggles in our lives. And so, what white people who are trying to navigate their way through this or don't understand it, all the way, it's like, everyone's life becomes better. The economy becomes better if that's all you worry about. Social constructs, everything becomes better when we're all equal. When one is over the other, you're gonna have fights in the streets all the time.
And I thought the question that Keith asked earlier was really interesting. Like, what does this look like if we win? If this plays out to the most advantageous way, what does this look like? And for me, what came up when you asked that was, I want to, like, if we're going to stop business, if every company from Nordstrom's to Nike is putting out an ad saying Black Lives Matter, then I'm not here for small incremental change. I want
Yeah.
to see
Yeah.
systems of harm be completely transformed. So if we have a police system that started its roots in slave catching, I want to see that defunded. If we have an education system that has prioritized the lives of white children over Black children, I want to see that reformed. Like, we have an opportunity in this moment to think bigger with our organizational systems and with our own businesses. And like, what a beautiful time to be alive, to be able to both bear witness to that change and also to be able to be part of it. And it's like, if we are not an active participant in this change, we are just allowing it to happen around us. And so it's like such an amazing opportunity to say, here is the future state that's most healing to my baby that's going to be born in August, or to my 11-year-old girl who's ready to go to a school that's more exciting and more thrilling for her. And so I'm really like in this moment of like, this is radical transformation. So like, let's put our wish list in. Let's not think small, but let's like go really hard.
That's it. There's a guy, Bomani Jones, he's a sports writer, but he talks on his podcast. He talks on these issues just very eloquently, and he usually comes at them from a very very practical point of view, and he really digs in a different way, gives you a different perspective. But what he was saying, was that I lost my train of thought right there. Lord have mercy.
I could feel that it was going to be a good one, though.
What was Bomani talking about?
All right, Joe. We'll fix it in post.
Well, what did you just say? What did you?
Well, I was talking about the wish list of like we can
the wish
think
list.
bigger.
Yeah.
He said, listen. In white America, he says he's never had anything. He's never seen anything like this, where businesses are literally having to stop and think about their actions, put out statements. People are getting fired for past aggressions, things they're saying currently in this moment. So he said, listen, if you are in an industry or a business or a company or a church group or anything, and you have had a grievance or a gripe or something that has just dug in your soul that you have been too afraid to bring up, white folks and Black folks, right? This is the time to bring it up. This is the time to bring it up and ask for it and demand change. I mean, look at the NFL. The players put out a video. Some of the more high-profile players, Goodell's making a statement the next day, right? Against the stance that they have been hard lined on for 4 years since Kaepernick took a knee, right? Like, this is the time. If you think your business, your company has some issues that need to be addressed, but it was never the right time. This is the time. This is the time to bring it up.
This is the time.
I thought so much about this, about like how the Me Too movement scared so many men because they felt like there was this reckoning that was happening. And I was like, hell yeah, there's a reckoning, and that's good and that's healthy. This is no longer a place where this is not how we should not have been running business. We should not have been treating women this way. And I feel like we're having this reckoning right now where white folks are very nervous and scared about like, well, what does this mean? And no one is asking for revenge. Everyone's just asking for equality. And I think that reckoning is happening now. And that is a beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was explaining this to a friend of mine, a white guy. He's an amazing dude. He works in the brewing industry, and he was just like, what do protests achieve? He was like, everyone's just in the streets, and I don't understand, like, what is this achieving? He was like, when does a protest ever work? I'm like, well, just let's take the most recent one, the women's movement, right? The Me Too movement, right? Like, businesses and their cultures, the things that can be done and not done, people are minding their manners, and finally and understanding that, hey, like, we can't just do things the way we used to do with hiring practices, with language, with harassment, with touching women's space. I mean, it's like, it's not perfect, right? But it has changed business culture, if nothing else, greatly for
radically,
the better. And just radically, and it's like, so it does make change. We are the people. We are the masses. We are.
This is our moment.
Yep, this is it.
Do it.
This is it. Like, we have such a wonderful opportunity right now. The win-win for me is to see as many people, all of us, even us, getting our hands in there and helping to shape this change, right?
Yeah.
Everybody needs to do their part, in this work. Everybody.
Yep.
One of the things I want to bring up, though, because once we are mostly entrepreneurs and have our own businesses, is one of the things that I really hope that comes out of this is that we see a shift in access for us business owners, that of color there in the Portland metro area. Because when I started my business, it was tough. It was an uphill battle, just trying to build that network. Because a lot of times we don't have the networks in place to help us succeed, right? But it was also very difficult trying to build that network, or even going to agencies and trying to get a business loan or trying to get that support. It was an automatic no, or I was just dismissed. So it was really, really difficult. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I had to reach out and go more national instead of just staying right there in Portland. So I'm hoping that shifts.
Now, how does that look when, the next step, let's extrapolate it out, to the next step, how does that look now when said, banking institution doesn't want to, give a loan to a Black person, or for whatever reason, there's no reason why, right? And then that person's conduct is put on Front Street. Then the business is put on blast. Now the business is losing money, right? It's like you can't just do what you used to do now because the world is paying attention.
Exactly.
Right? All it takes is one thing, one moment of harm, and all of a sudden, your job might be gone, your business might be boycotted. People pulling their money out of your bank, right? Like when before the lens wasn't on it, right? So and you just had to say, oh, I didn't get approved for whatever reason, and I have to move on. But now it's like, okay, well, why? Let's dig into this. Let's look at history. Let's look at your practices. Does this bank have a history of not loaning to Black people? How many Black people have you denied, right? Let's go through your public records. Let's figure this out. And then when that's on Front Street and your business is labeled as racist or prejudice, or, maybe I don't know that you're racist, but the evidence would show that you don't do these things for Black people, So what does that look like for your business now? Now you're held to account by the public, by the masses, and your business ceases to exist. Look at dude from CrossFit. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I know.
$4 billion a year this dude was bringing in on the name of CrossFit, right? People are changing their names. They're disaffiliating with CrossFit. They're most prominent people. The CrossFit Games, all their sponsorships.
Oh,
gone, right?
Reebok. Reebok walked away.
A stupid tweet, right? So when people got to check themselves now, just like with the Me Too movement, you can't just come out and say willy-nilly what you're thinking. You got to take a time and think. And just making someone pause to think about their actions and what they're going to say is a huge step forward to maybe someone waking up and being like, maybe what I was doing was just wrong. Maybe I was wrong when I was, sexually harassing my coworker. I was wrong when I was prejudiced against this Black person.
Yeah, the consequence of racism has always fallen on brown and Black folks. And we're seeing for the first time in our nation's history that the consequence of racism is falling on the racists. And that's a profound change. It's a profound change.
That's it.
And people are like, oh, so I might get in trouble for a tweet I said 3 years ago. And it's like, yeah, but I was getting called the N-word in the street. That's harm. I'm sorry that you're getting like a tweet that is, people are bringing that up, but you're getting called out on your racism. That is an enormous shift in our country and our culture.
Enormous.
It really is.
It's powerful. It's powerful. It resets the table and the lens through which the world has to view the space that we're in. So even if they don't understand it over time, they will have to say, like, why does the majority of the world now think this way and I don't? But I got to think about this. You know what I'm saying? Like, why could I lose my job or my, $4 billion a year business with a tweet, right? It's like, the introspection comes once you have to resign as CEO and you're home thinking like, whoa, what just happened here? Like, let's think about this, right?
The thing that's really, I think, important for white folks to realize is the consequence of being racist for white folks is often monetary. The consequence of racism on Black folk is your life. And so it is really like these are different stakes, but I am so glad to see that we're starting to have consequence.
Yeah. Yes. And it's interesting too, a lot of our white advocates are the ones putting them on blast.
Yeah. Which is another big shift. There's another huge shift. You know?
Well, I mean, we talked about this idea of fear, fear of what are people going to think. And what's really critical, Joe, to follow up on kind of what you were saying, was that when somebody makes a statement and they go to that introspective place, but then when they find out that their customers, their employees, their coworkers, their family actually don't feel the way they feel.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
And we have the courage to start standing up to our bosses and our mothers and our fathers and our friends and saying, that's not right.
Yeah,
I don't
speak your
believe
truth.
that.
Yeah, speak your truth.
Because we skate through and we separate this issue of race because he's my friend, because he's a good employee, because he's my boss. And we're at a very critical moment where we have to stop separating those things as white people. We have to say these two things cannot exist simultaneously.
That's it.
And the more we are able to do that and do that publicly and do that openly, hopefully the more progress we will make.
Yeah, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but in that discomfort, that's when that magic happens, right? Nobody said this work is easy, so you have to be very comfortable in those uncomfortable situations, and over time it'll get easier and easier and easier. But the biggest thing is just to start.
Correct.
And you'll fumble. Like, white folks will fumble. Black folks will get it wrong. Will say something.
Oh yeah.
Will harm somebody. But the goal is not perfection. The goal is that we are working towards getting better.
A journey.
We're learning to repair quicker. We're learning to say, "Ooh, I stepped in it there. I'm sorry. Like, that's not how I meant that." And then we get more resilient with this conversation. And so I think there's a lot of white folks right now that are like, oh, I don't want to get this wrong. I have a lot of Black people in my life and I want to be a good person. And it's like, good. That's great. You are going to get it wrong sometimes, and that's okay. We're still here. You're still invited to work out. You're still coming. It's okay. We just need you here. We need you in this life.
And fumbling is okay when your head is in the right space, right?
Yeah.
And ideally, when a fumble happens, in a perfect world, it would be it would be white people or the white people around you to call you on your fumble and say, hey, like, that's not how we do this anymore, right? As opposed to it being so untalked about to the point where he was unsaid. So confident that his tweet would not, he could tweet that and not have any repercussion, right? And so, that's the lens he was in. We're like, I can do this all day because this is how it's always been. But he didn't realize the moment, right? Where it's like, it should never get to that point where he thinks that I can just tweet this and everything will be fine, right? Like, ideally, it'd be like, someone close to them. And it's all coming out too, right? The people who have worked in the business say, hey, like, this has been happening for a long time, right? Those people weren't comfortable enough to tell him that, hey, we don't like this, and this is not right. This is not how we believe. And so he just marched on through life thinking that it was all right, to the point where he shot a tweet out that lost him his business. And so, it'll get to the point where a mistake and a blip is okay, because it won't be on Front Street if it gets caught quick enough by the people all around you to say, hey, hey, we don't roll like that. Like, and you shouldn't either, and here's why. And it's coming from someone who looks like you,
Yes, absolutely.
I saw an interview this week with Damon John of FUBU, and he said, and this is kind of what you were talking about earlier, Dina, was, entrepreneurs find problems in the market, and then they find ways to solve it. So as a small business community, as a community of entrepreneurs, what are some creative ways that we can start thinking about dealing with this issue of racism? And even more importantly than that, again, Dina, to follow up on a comment you had made, how do we start to build a pipeline of entrepreneurs of color so that we can have a more diverse, a more inclusive small business community right here in our neighborhood?
I would say first, what would have helped me, because years ago I had a group that I created just for that, and it was help to get business owners of color, more access and build those networks and do, professional development called the Urban Entrepreneurs Network. And I that was the hardest lift I think I ever had. I could not get support for it. We met anyway, and I would have an annual summit at Mercy Corps offices. And so I would have usually a mixed group of speakers, right? All ethnicities. But this one year I decided to have all Black female speakers. No one would fund the event. And I thought that was the biggest slap in the face, you know. So I paid for the event out of my pocket and highlighted these Black women, right? And so that's when I said, this is really bad. But the year before, when I had some white speakers, mainly white, and then I had a couple of folks from Nike on the panel. Oh, people couldn't wait to fund me. But when I had that other one, the next one, and which was my last one, with all Black females, it was not of value to anyone. You know, so what I would say is to be intentional about reaching out, find out where are the Black and brown owned business owners there in the Portland, Southwest Washington, Portland area. Actually reach out to them and say, and be totally authentic, you know, that this is what we want to do. We want to build a cohort for all of our businesses so that we all can thrive. And how do we sponsor each other, right?
Yeah.
Because what I needed at that time, I needed someone in a power position to sponsor me, to introduce me to that person that would believe in this mission and support me, but no one did, right?
And I think, Dina, what you said earlier about your network was so important. Like, I think I can't speak for everyone on this call, but part of the reason I was able to start my business was white men who had access to wealth that were invested in me, like personally invested in me. And a lot of white folks do not have people of color in their personal network. And networking is how business moves through this country. And if you have no Black or brown folks in your personal network, I'm not talking like people that cut your hair or people that like work in your home, but I'm talking about like people you are personally friends with and connected with. That is how entrepreneurship happens. Is that people are like, oh, they want to put some seed money in for you. They want to promote you. They want to talk you up in their church groups or their friend groups. So the most important thing I think white folks can do is to authentically expand their personal network so that they know and have a relationship with Black and brown folks, so that when Black and brown folks have an idea that they want to bubble up into a business, you are there to like support them and promote them and talk about them and invest emotionally, financially, spiritually, whatever the is.
Yeah, but Katie too, I think it's a two-way street as well. Our community, we need to know how to reach out to them as well, right? We shouldn't have to just wait and try to have them find us, you know, like I wouldn't have any problem reaching out to Jonathan and say, hey, you know, that's what I did. I quickly realized I had to get a group of white guys, okay, which I did. And so we're still all friends now, but they're the ones, but I said, and I was totally honest, I'm totally transparent in everything I do. So the ones who are really still there supporting me over coffee, I said, you know what, I really would like you to be on my executive council for my iUrban Teen program. And I told him, I said, and I will be honest with you, you're a white guy. You can get access to places that I can't, you know? And so I need that type of sponsorship. And they're like, so you want me to be your token? I'm like, yes.
It's also you know, if we're talking about business and financially as well, like it's also a realization that, you know, white people are going to have to come to an understanding that, you know, racism hurts white people greatly when it comes to when it comes to financial situations, right? Like it's been, you know, like I think it was like an MIT study or something that was like the more diverse a company is, or a company that has you know, more women at the top of their leadership and more people of color at the top of their leadership, do better as a company as opposed to, you know, ones that are less diverse. Because, you know, you got to think about, you know, the dollar, if that's what we're talking about, the dollar that is in these communities, right? You know, everyone has their dollar, and how it circulates is different. Black dollar circulates particularly poorly, but you know, that can all be changed. But white people suffer from it too, because you say, I'm literally making less money because I don't have a diverse company, right? You're turning your back to a whole swath of people who would support your company or do business with you if they saw someone that looked like them in a position of power, right? You know, I don't know. If it comes down to just a dollar figure, you know, there's an incentive right there, right? Everyone will become more successful and make more money and have more opportunity, more ideas get through and not get squashed with education and funding and scholarships and school funding, right? You know, how many Einsteins, how many Einsteins whittled away or shot and killed or ended up in prison, in the Black community because the opportunities weren't there. Who benefits from someone's brain like an Einstein, right? Everyone, right? We not even Einstein, right? That's an extreme, but like just doctors and lawyers and scientists and medical professionals and agriculturalists and maybe the cure to global warming was in the projects, but you sent it to jail. You know what I'm saying? Or you didn't give it the proper funding or whatever. So it's like everyone hurts. Everyone loses when we don't bring our talent forward, right? We all win by these ideas.
So Katie, I want to ask you then. So if we can all agree that people of color are not given the equal educational opportunities, our traditional methods of recruiting candidates will be, disproportionately not favorable to people of color, right? So how do we then go outside of these traditional avenues? How do we try to find this pool of candidates, this more diverse candidates, so we can find talent elsewhere? What are you doing, and what are some of those challenges, and how are you overcoming those?
So when clients ask me that, I usually can reply with a bit of a glib remark, which is it's not that Black and brown folks don't know how to use LinkedIn or don't know how to find you. If there are not Black and brown folks applying for your organization, it's because either you've signaled somehow that they are unwelcome, or you are not creating an organization in which they wish to work. And so it's not that we're not putting the advertisements in the right place. It's not that we are not expanding our reach or they don't know how to find us. It's because either you're choosing not to hire them or they're choosing not to work for you. And so those are the two things we must explore. Why are you choosing not to hire them? Like, what is it in your hiring practice that is broken that we need to rebuild? And then if they are choosing not to work for you, then what has your organization communicated, either actually with words or with the way you position yourself as in your employer brand as a place that Black and brown folks wouldn't want to work at? And so an example would be, some organizations will, really highlight, it's a fast-paced work environment, it's go, go, go. And it's like, what I'm hearing as a single Black mother is, I don't know if I'll be able to come home at a decent time to take care of my child. That might not be an opportunity for me. If I'm hearing that this is an environment that is, all of these degrees are required, even though they're entry-level roles for low wages. I'm hearing that you're expecting people who've had unpaid internships or things like that are not things that I've had access to. And so really be thoughtful about who you're communicating as your employer brand and what is your hiring practices, because it is not that brown and Black folks can't find you. That's not the problem.
Well, I'm gonna kind of say something else around that too, because when I used to do recruiting, I used to do executive recruiting, executive search, and companies would reach out to me because I knew they wanted diverse talent. And I have a pretty broad global network. When I would put that ad out, to the galaxy and to all my diverse networks, it was like pulling teeth to try to get people to apply. The first ones that would jump on that, even though they didn't have the skill sets, were white men, And so I have to really talk into some of my folks into showing them, you do meet this qualification because you've done X, Y, Z. So a lot of times we don't think we have the skill sets for that, no matter how the job might be worded. So it's I think for us, a lot of times we will kind of wait and think that we have to have every little marker on that job application before we can apply. The other thing are the recruiters. They're the first touch point. If you have bias or normalized racism, because I don't really like to use the word biases anymore because it is just normalized racism. If you have that and they're the first touch point, we could feel that, we can sense that. That's an unwelcoming environment. Then you have, if you are lucky enough to get an interview, you might have hiring managers who also have their own issues. So one of the trainings that I created at the city of Seattle was unconscious decision-making, right? So that to try to interrupt those biases or things that you have when you're in that interview process. There's so many layers to this, you know, so many layers. And about can't find diverse talent. Diverse talent is out there. Sometimes you got to get out of that office and start building relationships in the community.
Go.
You know, one of my questions I had was for Greg, and it had to do with, you know, being an investment professional. You know, what are some of the hurdles that you've had to overcome, and has racial bias played a role in your ability to help others achieve financial success?
When I first started, it was my education was believing in myself. When I first opened those books, and I was like, oh my God, these books aren't even in English because of the way I grew up in my education. And then when I did pass the test, my head got big, and I thought I was going to go save the world with my financial literacy and teach everybody in my community, hey, this is how we can do this. This is how we do it. This is like, I had to step back and take a look and say, hey, not everybody understands what you understand. You're going to have to change your habits of the way we look at money. So the biggest hurdle was just me growing as a person to learn how I can just talk to people about money, and me understanding where I came from. I didn't have money, but I came from people that had a lot of money growing up in Palm Springs. And it's just believing in myself. So one of the hurdles is having the confidence to sit there and talk to a bunch of people in a seminar. And it's like she said, I felt that I had to know everything before I got up there. I had to be the best. And I just didn't have the confidence. To be honest, I didn't have the confidence. Although I worked hard my whole life, I made all my money on my back, not my brains, on my back, just outworking everybody. But now, you know what? I'm changing that, and it worked. And it's seeing my kids, seeing their dad uses mine. They're using their mind now. So I feel if I can get into the households of a community, if they can see mom and dad sitting with a financial professional that looks like somebody like them, and they're going over budget and they're going over plan, and the kids see that and they see mom and dad do that, the kids catch on, and the learning process starts, and they're starting to build a legacy. And then we start passing on that legacy. Then we have more money, you know, and then we're in the right financial products. So that's, you know, so the difficult part for me was backing up and just listening to people and just seeing where they are right now and just building a relationship with them and not trying to rush them into something, because not everybody has the money to invest in an investment account, but they can't afford life insurance. And another frustrating thing for me is people being in the wrong products that I know that it's going to leave them in a bad financial situation at the end. Like I just talked to a 70-year-old lady that she's had I'm not going to get into it, but she had a product, and the product is not working for her, and she's pretty much basically lost all her money. Mm. And it's wrong. So it's just it's just so much out there that needs to be addressed. So
yeah, the wealth gap is huge in a lot of Black and brown communities.
Yeah, so that's what hurts me the most. And it's just even in BNI, you saw me speaking. I was the only Black guy in there, and it was difficult for me to get up there and talk. For other people to actually really take me seriously, like, does this guy know what he's talking about? You know what I mean? That's what I'm thinking in my head. Not that they were thinking it, but just getting over those hurdles. Just now, just the way things are now, I'm just going for it. And I just felt like, you know what do we got to lose? You know, I've seen the changes in my kids, and I've seen the changes in other people. And I think we have a great opportunity to take advantage of the situation. And I think we all have different skills. We've all been put on this earth to do different things. And I think if we just use our different skills, it's like Mother Nature. We'll all work together, and it'll all come into full circle.
Yeah.
You know, and
we're out of harmony. We're out of harmony. We're out of balance as a society, as a community. You know, as Americans. You know, this experiment. You know, everything's better once we get back into harmony.
We all have our duty, right? So, and I really want to ask all of you this question: what is our duty as people of color, the Black community? What do we have to do? What is our responsibility in all this? What do we have to do to ensure that this doesn't stop with a hashtag?
I would say pressure, right? There's not been many times in history to, you know, where our pressure was invited and accepted, right? You know, you talk about the civil rights movement, you know, that pressure was met with dogs and hoses, you know what I'm saying? You know, and beatings, you know, this pressure is being met for the most part with open ears, you know. There's obviously rogue dissenters at the top, you know, but the world is listening right now, you know, and so
the whole world,
the whole world is listening, and so at this point, you can't say so. All these people who put their, you know, the hashtag Tuesday or whatever, the Black Tuesday, or they made a statement, you know, in support of the Black community. This is on record now, you know, the revolution is being televised now, right? So you know, it's a different age, right? So now that it's televised, now that you have said we have to make these changes, we commit this money, we promise. Now the pressure needs to be put on. So now you said that you're going to do these things. You can't take them back. It didn't happen in a closed door room. It happened in front of the world. You tweeted it. On your company logo. You know, so now, when you're not doing these things, we can call back to this moment and say, now, wait a minute, you know, after George Floyd got killed, you said you were going to do this, but the evidence would show that you haven't done shit, you know? So what does that look like for you and your company and your business or your personal relationship now? You know, you said you would support us. So now let's talk about this. Let's productively figure out how to make a difference, how to make a change where we all win.
And that's the thing, Joe, is that we have to be at that table helping to design that change, right?
Yeah.
We can't say, okay, this is the problem, now you go fix it, because they're gonna fix it back in a dominant culture environment again. So we're back at square one.
Exactly.
So we have to be at the table being a part of this shift and changing those policies, changing those initiatives.
And I would add, the pressure from Black people as a whole has to come onto our prominent Black figures and people as well, right? So you talk about Michael Jordan giving his $100 million over 10 years. Michael Jordan hasn't had a word to say about anything involving the Black community. I was having this conversation with my friends the other day. It's like, you know, you ask somebody if they love Michael Jordan as a basketball player, 100%. You ask a Black person they love Michael Jordan as a person, it's like 70-30, right? Like, it's like dude doesn't roll with us. Same thing with like Tiger Woods, right? People like this, you know, like these are just two examples, sports examples that I'm using, right? Of Black prominent people who have not used their money and their voice and their power to do something good, right? So the pressure has to come with our Black leaders and prominent Black people and wealthy people, people who do have access and influence and power, to put their thumb on the scale, you know, and say, this is what my people are asking for, and I'm in a position to come get it. So, you know, instead of sitting back and protecting the brand or protecting the legacy, or you know, they won't mess it up so they can, you know, nobody won't buy my next album if I come out. That's all done. That's all over. If you're in a position of power, now it's time to say, hey, this is what we need.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Keith.
I feel there's a lot of people that are nervous.
Nervous? Why are they nervous?
I just feel, you know, I kind of feel that there are a lot of people that are, I had a lady ask me, well, kind of say, she's white lady, she goes, well, I don't want you guys to take everything that I have. I was like, what?
What?
Yeah. So we don't want to take nothing. We just want to work want the same opportunity as you to get what you have. I don't want to take nothing. So I think some people feel a shift and they're kind of nervous of retaliation or something.
Yeah, I don't know, but you know what? What do you guys?
You know what I mean? Maybe that's
What
just
are
me.
the,
That's just the way I feel.
you know, Keith and Joe, this is kind of different way of thinking, but for me, I always say I have privilege, right? I wouldn't want to walk through this world feeling like I don't have it, you know?
Yeah.
Mm.
I say I'm going to walk through this world with my privilege and I'm taking it with me, right? Because there's power in that and there's power in claiming it, okay?
Yeah.
So just think about that. Just think about, do you want to walk through this life just feeling like we don't have privilege? I would tell you, when I first found out about our ancestors being slaves, and I was in the first grade, right? And Stacy's mom said, Dina's a slave or something. And I didn't know what it was. And so, but I remember when I went home and asked my mom, I said, Stacy's mom said I was a slave. Am I a slave? And I remember the look on my mother's face. But then I also remember when my mom started telling me about slavery and our history, I instantly felt lesser than, you know, I instantly felt othered, you know, and I remember that feeling. And so it was just over the past, say, 10 years, I said, you know what? No, I am going to own my privilege and I'm going to walk through this life and I'm going to teach my granddaughters how to walk in their privilege, right? So I think that there's a mindset that we need to do as people of color, as Black people, that we need to start doing a whole mind shift and own the power that we have. Really quick story. I at this, and I talk a lot, you guys, so just shut me up anytime. But when I started the city of Seattle, and the first thing that a lot of Black women were coming to me saying was the systemic racism there is stopping them. There's all these issues. So I had a meeting with as many of them as I could, and I heard them out. And then I said, okay, I hear you, but now what are we going to do to change this? Their reply, and this happens a lot in our community, there's nothing that we can do because it's systemic, they're never going to change. And I told them, oh no, don't think you can't change this. You know, don't let go of your power. There's power in numbers. I said, you can't tell me that you get 50 Black women together with a strategic plan in place and you walk into that mayor's office. Don't you think that's going to scare him shitless? Okay. I said, so we will see some change, but a lot of times we're so reactive instead of being proactive, right? And designing that plan and then bringing others into that plan, you know, instead of going to dominant culture and saying, okay, this is what I want. Can you fix it? No. This is how we're moving. How are you going to be a part of this movement with us? You know, so it's a whole mind shift we have to do.
And I would say meet people at their level, right? You said that lady who was like, you know, I'm afraid that, well, one, fear, try to dissipate the fear no matter what, because the fear is a powerful driving force in whatever that they're thinking. But then once you dissipate the fear, you know, you meet this lady who's saying, I'm afraid, I don't want you to take everything I have. So by meeting her at her level, you explain to her, say, hey, I don't want everything you have. I want us all to have everything. You know what I'm saying? By racism and racial inequality and us getting our freedoms and our rights and systemic racism out of our experiment called America, we all win. You have better everything, and I have better everything. You have better food. You have better healthcare. You have better you have better doctors and lawyers and, you know, and teachers and better roads. And when everyone can functionally participate in this experiment equally, we all win. There's a utopia over the, you know, there's a promised land over the other side of the hill, but y'all got to come with us. And so it's nothing to be afraid of. You're not going to lose a thing. Everybody's going to be all right. If we figure this out, you know, I think dissipating the fear and then meeting them at their level for what they're actually afraid of, I think that helps, you know, take someone like that down off the
Mhm.
ledge, you know.
So
Awesome.
did we hit some of the areas that you guys wanted to talk about? Is there something else that you wanted to go over? Are we missing something?
Go ahead, Keith.
I was,
Yeah.
coming into this year, I had some pretty. I just have goals this year, and one of my goals was to speak more at schools where there's at-risk kids that are going through the same things I went through as a kid growing up, and so my responsibility, I feel like, is for me to continue to work as hard as I can to be as successful as I can as a person of color in the United States of America, and to build relationships with the communities and the people that have the kids that are going through what I'm going through or what I went through as a kid, and to also leverage those relationships to bring people with me. And so those are really two things that I'm really focused on this year and really for the rest of my life. And so doing my part in that way. So
yeah. And the same here, like for me, it's continuing iUrban Teen and working with these youth, building that yellow brick road, for them, because a lot of our kids, we do an intentional reach to boys who are on the fray, right? Maybe at risk of dropping out of school, because I tell everybody, we know they're brilliant. They just haven't had that spark yet, right? And so we try to create that spark, and then fighting the good fight on being equitable. This work, anytime you're working in this space, it's tiring, it's a heavy lift, and no matter how edgy you are, because I'm pretty edgy with this stuff, no matter how edgy you are, it's like you're still not making the difference that you want to make, right? But so I'll continue fighting the good fight and working with these kids also.
That's awesome. Joe, we're going to burn the lifeboats.
Burn the lifeboats, baby. Burn your lifeboats. I live by that mantra. It's like, you can't look back if your lifeboat is on fire. You got to power forward. You got to power ahead, power through. It's I think it's such a powerful, analogy. It's like burn your lifeboats. Let's do this. If we're gonna do this, if this is the paradise we want, if this is the, if we're really trying to create a more perfect union, then we got to do it together. We will never have the promised land that we want as a people, as humanity, as a world, if we don't get rid of the fabricated constructs that keep us separate. The most terrifying thing to the racist, white, powerful elite through this whole thing has been the peaceful, so I don't talk about it as much, the peaceful protests that are littered with white people and black people together.
Yes.
They spend so much time trying to divide us. And once you divide people, you can conquer people. And that's all some people have been doing for the last few years, right? But when people are saying, enough, I'm tired of your bullshit, we're together on this, it's terrifying, because they know that the power structure that keeps us all down and all, oppressed, economically, spiritually, physically, as a people, everything, right?
It's shifting.
Once they see us united, it's a terrifying sight for so many of the powerful elite right now, that, oh my God, the people are uniting, and that's exactly what we don't want, you know. And so that alone should let you know everything you should need to know about what the power of the people is once we're all together and on the same page. Nothing can hold us back. They can't deny either side, anybody, what their rights are as humans, as Americans, what's in the Constitution, right? At some point, everybody's gonna have to start living up to this Constitution, and really obeying it and putting these things into place. If all men are created equal, then all men are created equal. We can't keep doing it halfway, because there is no halfway when it comes to something like that.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, Joe. Well said. I am so thankful that you all spent the time with us. This was fantastic. I know it only scratches the surface. I mean, Ben's right. We had 2 pages of questions, and I think we maybe got through one page of questions.
Can I do just a homework list real quick?
Yeah, please.
For everyone, it's super easy, and as far as like recommending things that people should watch and digest or read, reading is is a tough ask, particularly for youth, right? So I don't necessarily recommend books unless people really want to read, but there are 3 documentaries in particular that I think people should watch in this order to help them reshape and reframe the way they think about the world around them so that they can start walking the path forward and start answering some of the harder questions, right? The first one is it's called Requiem of the American Dream. It's by Noam Chomsky. It is available on Prime right now. It doesn't have any racial tones to it. It's more about society and America as a whole, and he breaks down this social experiment, you know, and its shortcomings and a way to think about that. And then that kind of sets the table. And once you have that table set and you're seeing the world through this lens of everything not exactly being what you thought it was, I think the very next one is 13th.
Oh,
and
yeah,
I know a lot of people, I know a lot of people have seen 13th, but rewatching 13th right now during this time, and I've seen it 10 times, but I rewatched it just recently, and it has a whole new profoundness to it right now. And then the third one is I'm Not Your Negro. By the way, 13th is on Netflix. I'm Not Your Negro by James Baldwin, a Black scholar and writer. It's on Prime Video right now. It's the perfect third documentary to bring it all home and really help people touch into their emotional strings in a poetic and philosophical way about how we're failing each other and how we're all losing this battle if we don't come together. It's powerful. I mean, if you sat and binged those 3, there's no way you could see the world the same way after doing so.
Yeah, Joe, what was the first one?
The first one is called Requiem of the American Dream by Noam Chomsky. It came out in 2016. They filmed it over a long time, but it came out during the elections, and he's not political. He's a scholar, you know. So he just attacks these things with numbers and ideas and history and just the facts, and he lays them out in a very digestible way. And it has no racial overtones. It's not, you know, it's more about society, right? But it really helps set the table for the next 2.
For the next 2.
In your mind of how we're all losing this American dream battle systemically, white people, black people, everybody, and we got to figure all these things out if we're going to do any of it right.
Outstanding. Go ahead, Ben. Bring us home.
Oh, well, thank you. And
I'm
we'll
done.
see you.
I'm done. I got a lot to say. I can talk about this all day, all night. So y'all just tell me shut up. I'll be done.
I mean, Joe is a Business Over Beer alumnus. He already has a 2-part episode.
That's true. That is true.
He's the only one who talked so long that we had to make his episode
For sure. That's a fact.
I got a lot to say.
You got a lot to say.
And
we love you for it, my man. Thank you for
I
being
love y'all
on.
too. I love everyone. I love all y'all. You know, this is an important time. I love y'all for doing this and giving us this platform to talk and speak and, you know, wrestle with these issues. So
Yeah, and the thing is, it all starts with dialogue. So.
That's exactly it.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly it.
Yep, all starts with dialogue. You guys, thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed meeting everyone.
You too,
Likewise.
Dina.
Thanks, Dina, Keith, Joe. I really appreciate you guys taking the time.
And
Thank you,
Katie
guys.
and Greg as well.
Bye.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Anytime.
We will see you. We'll see you in the next episode of the Biz Over Beer podcast.
Good night.
Good night.
Business Over Beer reminds you to always drink responsibly. Our theme song is Idiocracy by Christian Leo. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Business Over Beer.
Hey, Joe, you're still here.
Yeah, I was like, okay.
He's hanging out.
I was like,
He's like, I'm just in the car.
You can totally hang out, man. We'll take you home.
No. I gotta.